Greetings. Whatever time zone you might be in today, you are right on time. We welcome you today to the Spiritual Engagement Hour at the Metropolitan Community Church of Washington, D.C. If it's your first time to join us, my name is Reverend Dwayne Johnson. I'm the senior pastor of the Metropolitan Community Church of Washington, D.C. And we're so grateful for your presence here today. I would love to hear from you. My email is revdwayne@mccdc.com. And with us today is also our associate pastor, Reverend Kathy Alexander, who will introduce herself first.
I'm Reverend Kathy Alexander. And whoa, just want to say hello and welcome to the service.
Well, we're glad that you're here and thankful. This is a time for us to be in conversation together, and we're thankful for that opportunity. Let's begin today with just taking a moment to be present, again, wherever you might be. It may be 2 a.m. on demand for you, but wherever you might be, whatever time or time zone, take a moment just to be in touch with your body, to notice any places of tension. We're going to light a candle today, a candle that invites us to remember our center, to remember that place of the divine and the holy and the sacred within us. Thank you, God, for this morning, for this day, for this time right here at the MCCDC Memorial Chapel. We are thankful for the great cloud of witnesses, those who have gone before us and yet are still with us in spirit. Those who continue to love us from the next realm. We thank you, God, for this time today. We thank you for all the saints. Guide us and lead us. Amen. Again, we welcome you today. And as we talked about being present to the great cloud of witnesses and those who have gone before us, today we're very excited that our conversation starter is one who continues to speak. Today we'll be talking about the fierce prophet, poet, activist, mother, lesbian, feminist, womanist, Audre Lorde. Born on February 18th, 1934, and passing of breast cancer on November 17th, 1992. We'll be looking at one of the essays from one of her powerful works, Sister Outsider. And the essay we'll be looking at today is very powerful because it offers balance to what we often think about silence. Is from an address that she delivered on December 28th, 1977 at the Modern Language Association's Lesbian and Literature panel in Chicago, Illinois. And the title of this essay is The Transformation of Silence into Language and Action. We'll be sharing some thoughts and the import of this for today. Most of the essays in Sister Outsider were written in the 70s, a couple in the early 80s, and yet it is as if they were written yesterday. Their potency and their timeliness remain so very relevant. So I'm going to join the circle now, and as I do so, would welcome some of your initial thoughts on the impact of Audre Lorde on your life or your teachings. She wrote to many at MCCDC and beyond. Any initial thoughts on how this impact continues today, or the influence? Now we'll begin with a quote from the start of this essay. Part of the reason we're speaking to this today. Welcome, Jackie Lois from Detroit. Glad that you're with us. I know you're an Audre Lorde aficionado. And is that we often talk about silence. talk about the power of silence. Be still and know that God is God. And oftentimes we forget that while silence has its place, that silence can also be oppressive. Silence can also be an enemy of change. And silence, in fact, can be at times an actual, not only, it's often an entry to the spirit, it can be something that obstructs the spirit. And so we want to talk about that counterbalance today. So any initial thoughts, or we'll jump right into, we're probably not going to get to everything I've highlighted today, but we can get to maybe a number of items.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm really excited to see you all up in the chapel. And this topic is near and dear to my heart. I think a couple of years ago in Bible study, we talked about reading Sister Outsider, and we was going to get to it, and we was going to get to it, and we didn't quite get to it, but I knew sometimes things just take time. My initial reaction is, and some of you may know this already, Audre Lorde and I went to the same high school. And she was a weird girl, a weird poet back then and there. We grew up almost walking distance. She's about 10, 12 years older than I am, so she's sort of the previous generation. And her mother didn't quite understand why they were letting her do all this poetry. That's not why I sent you to that high school. What's wrong with you? And she went to Catholic school, a place called St. Mark's, which is the closest one to my house, but I went to a different Catholic elementary school. And so the fact that we had these parallel lives was really interesting. And I knew about her, but I didn't know so much about the parallels. And Reverend Robin did his PhD on Audre Lorde and James Baldwin, and he knew way more about her than I knew about her, and helped me to see the connections between her and my own life. And I love Sister Outsider because she's so passionate about her thoughts and her ideas and her evolution, and how you can have one avenue, you know, whether it's poetry or your interests that lead you someplace, and maybe your first reaction is to be silent or to be quiet, or maybe your culture tells you not so much nobody wants to hear what you have to say, but speaking out is dangerous. But I would encourage everybody who listens to this in the future that if you haven't read the book, read the book. If you don't want to take on the whole book, you could take any essay in the book and start there and think about it. And just imagine this young girl at 12 or 13 or 14 coming into her own and growing spiritually and emotionally. And I'm just excited to hear the quotes and hear the share. And I hope that other people will take the opportunity to just hear her prophetic voice. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that perspective. So if you look at Audre Lorde's writings, you'll see that she is always very, very intentional in how she begins and how she ends. And so I would like to just offer the opening to this essay, The Transformation of Silence into Language and Action. She begins by saying, I have come to believe over and over again that what is most important to me must be spoken, made verbal, and shared, even at the risk of having it bruised or misunderstood. Powerful beginning. We're going to talk more about this movement towards breaking beyond the silence. But any thoughts on just her opening line, that opening quote? We'll continue this. Go ahead.
I wanted to share from the previous question, just my awe of Audre Lorde and what she went through, as well as what she, kind of what she put other people through in terms of making sure that she was heard, making sure that she wasn't ignored, and making sure that, there was voice and she gave voice to, injustice, overcoming injustice. And one of my favorite quotes from her, and I don't think it's from Sister Outsider, but it's when we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard or welcomed. But when we're silent, we're still afraid. So it's better to speak. And I've tried to continue to remember that as I think about her and as I do everything else.
Thank you.
So
That's another great quote.
And I would piggyback on that and just this word of awe. Around Audre Lorde is what comes up for me. I've been just kind of sitting in the feeling. And it's like, I don't know this person. So Jackie, what you bring up is really important because, somebody who knew this person in some kind of way. And, I feel pretty clear about the difference in what it means to know somebody and know their work and the impact of their work. The impact of Audre Lorde in my life does bring up awe. And that's from the first reading of her work to continue reading of her work, in particular also because she experienced breast cancer and wrote about it. Also I taught her work over many years and I utilized her work in places where her voice was so important to utilize in work with others. And so awe is really, I was trying to figure out what words, speaking of language, I could use that was reflecting what I was feeling. And awe is one of the words. So I was appreciating that you came up with that word.
So continuing with another quote in the spirit of awe. Thank you for that word. She writes, "What I most regretted were my silences. I betrayed myself into small silences while I planned someday to speak or waited for someone else's words. And I began to recognize a source of power within myself that comes from the knowledge. And while it is most desirable not to be afraid, learning to put fear into a perspective gave me great strength. My silences had not protected me. Your silence will not protect you." And the first thought that comes to me is that my silence will also not protect others. I'm thinking to myself, how many times much of her work is so incisive, and I've wondered, looking back, I'm a processor and a quote unquote discerner. And I'm thinking of how many times I've been in a space, be it virtual or on site, and something's been said, something hasn't felt right, something's been said that is oppressive or needs clarification or is misogynistic or racist. And how many times have I not spoken and interrupted? So there's I'm still called to be compassionate with my silences and to note them and to recognize them. And she's so vulnerable and open here about the betrayals of silence and recognizing that and then speaking about it. And I forget which essay it is, but she spoke about being in a setting with a group of womanists and feminists, and some racist things were said, and she was the only Black woman in the room, and they all looked to her. And it's like, as I recall, my sense of that story is that she felt that the other voices were not willing to speak. We put her in a place that was unfair and continued to extend the oppression. some of you are probably more familiar with that particular story than I am, but certainly that kind of experience. So thoughts on that quote that I just read, or your experiences?
Well, thank you for,
On
oh,
it,
I'm
just-
sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, I didn't want to interrupt you. I didn't know if you were finished.
No, come on in.
I I have heard that quote, and I wanted to bring up this idea that about silence not protecting you, or fear. And I think that, and I'm talking about me personally, but also things that other people have shared with me, is that it takes a lot of discernment about when to be quiet and when not to be quiet. I think there's some people that are always quiet, they're always silent. And so maybe that's kind of their default. I'm more of a chatterer. I'm more of a speak up kind of person. And I think a lot of times I talk too much. But this notion that she talks about this and other writers talk about, well, when are you supposed to be silent and when should you speak up? I don't think we pay enough attention, that people agonize about that all the time. And I don't know if it was her or I heard in another conversation that even though your silence won't protect you, there are consequences of speaking up. And that different people at different points of their life have to weigh the consequences of speaking up. And I really like the fact that we have a place, a spiritual community where we can talk about that, because whether it's coming out or cursing out your boss or having a knee-jerk reaction to something, like speaking too quickly before you listen, not letting somebody else speak when it's time to listen. I think those are all factors that most of us don't have a place to talk about. Well, should I say something? Should I not say something? And then, back to that high school experience, one of the things she does talk about, and other alumni that went to that high school was mainly immigrant women. At that time, it was an all-girls high school. And many, not all, but many of the young women there were first or second generation survivors and thrivers from the Holocaust. And there was a lot of conversation about when being silent probably saved your life or saved somebody else's life. But at the same time, if you have a history of silence, there are times that people say, well, I know if I speak up, I'm going to die. I mean, like serious consequence, or my family will be harmed, or I'll lose my job, or we'll lose where we live, or something horrific will happen to somebody else. Do I still have the right or the responsibility or the privilege of speaking out? And I remember so often that conversation, that discernment around consequences. Does it protect you? And fear. And the other thing I wanted to add is I worked at the VA for probably a good 20 years. And one of the things that the veterans taught me that I wasn't expecting to learn from them is that not only does silence have consequences, they spend a lot of time thinking about that. And I remember one veteran who, I can't remember which war it was. I mean, sometimes all the wars blend together, but he was saying to me, he said that even though your silence doesn't necessarily protect you, that you learn how to walk with fear. And I never really got a sense of that. And he said, when you're afraid, you do something anyway. And then he used that example of silence, that sometimes you're fearful about speaking, but your fear can be just as damaging to you. And that one of the things that he had learned as a warrior was that it's not like warriors aren't afraid and they just like blindly do stuff. They're afraid and they do it anyway, given the consequences, given, should I stand back, stand down, should I be quiet? And I was always really impressed I was always really impressed by that conversation, but also really impressed with his notion about you have to kind of weigh the context and where you are, that he felt like when he was in war or in a conflict situation or he had to rescue somebody, he was easily able to put his fear aside. But now that he was back and he was dealing with the consequences and the ramifications of some of his actions, he found that being silent and fearful was much more of an issue for him. So I just wanted to put that out there, that people struggle with these decisions and that being silent, sometimes, believe it or not, sometimes I don't have words to say. And so I'm quiet, not so much because I'm fearful, it's just I lack the ability to put into words. And the other thing is some people are just not worth you talking to. It's like, why am I like wasting my breath? It's not going to help me and it's not going to change the situation. So I'm glad we're having this conversation, and I'm very grateful for her willingness to put into words those moments of when to speak and when not, and the consequences and of your family, your friends, your community. We speak out. We pull consequences for other people who may be affected by our actions and what we say and when we say it.
Yeah. Okay. So how do we know? Kathy, come on in.
And so much is going around in my head right now.
Yeah.
Jackie, thank you for mentioning the VA because that's where I'm not being silent. I had a group this week and it was basically saying if you have like anger, you're probably the only one angry at the situation. The people you're angry with are going on with their lives. So why are you holding on to that? And how to let that go. And I had anger around the surgeons that did my double mastectomy. I said I don't want to be left like Frankenstein's daughter, and they left me like Frankenstein's daughter. Then when I went back, they said, oh, we can fix that. And then I went back again and says, oh no, all we can do is scar revision. And it won't be any different than what you look like right now. So that caused the anger. So after listening to the mindfulness part of it and letting that anger go, because it's only hurting me, they're going about their lives, is that I'm going to advocate for people behind me. Because in the VA, they will do reconstruction if you want breast, but they won't do reconstruction of chest if you don't want breast. And to me, that's a double standard. So I've turned that anger into advocacy. So I am not being silent anymore. I'm a master's trained nurse. I know how to do research, and I'm pulling together research that says that breast reconstruction and chest reconstruction are both plastic surgery or reconstruction surgery. So why is there a double standard? So I'm pulling together information because in the Marine Corps, I learned how to look at the orders and the directives, and I can go to a general and say, sir or ma'am, the sergeant doesn't have to do this based on Marine Corps order and Navy instruction, don't, and they can't say a word. And, I did that in the Marine Corps too. But not being silent, but taking an advocacy is breaking the silence. And it's scary because you're in the VA system, you don't know who is covering who and who is in cahoots with who. You take that chance. But not being silent gave me power. And now that I'm going to take on this aspect of the VA's care, it just empowered me.
Thank you.
so much. I think. Thank you, Jack. Yeah, yeah. This thing about, I think with the Audre Lorde's work in so many ways, there's always so much about, encouragement to reflect on my own relationship with power and how much it impacts what I'm doing. And I think this business about when I speak and when I'm silent and how it relates to where I am in relationship to power is the thing over and over again. And I think this piece of hers, again, it is about, so how does power impact where I'm silent and where I'm not? And in this particular piece, she's talking about, so at this point in my life, in these moments when she's writing it, I'm up against realizing that I might die any day. And so as I'm in this particular situation, I'm really aware of these things that maybe I put away because of fear or because of things that I think I can't say because of maybe long-term or short-term consequences. But if I'm gonna die tomorrow, how does that impact my understanding of my relationship to power? And I think, and it goes back to what you were saying, Jackie, and again, this business of, well, what does that mean in terms of consequences? I think it can be, I think I want to be aware of that from the places where I've been pushed on and pushed away and pushed to the edges and marginalized and all of that. I also want to be aware of that where I have power. Where, interestingly, again, Christianity is one of those places that comes up for me, where I may be in places where I have institutional power and things are going on in a room, or somebody's being harmed, or it very often right now will come up around gender, around trans, anti-trans behavior by folks. And so in those kind of places, can I realize that my power can allow me to just sit and not say anything? Because the consequences don't land directly on me. So that's still about my recognizing silence and my relationship to power. Whereas in other places where I'm pushed to the margins, I might immediately go, oh, here it is. Am I gonna say something or not? And I immediately feel it in my body and it's on me. Yeah. I wanna be as aware of that when I'm not right at the center of the consequential thing that's occurring. And so it's like both of those. And I think that's what so much of Audre Lorde's writing is about in so many ways, is can you recognize it from all these different places? Because she actually very often is writing to white women in the movement and saying, you left out our experience. And so that very often is what she's saying. So I think this business of what are you saying in relationship to power is so much what I appreciate. Yeah. Yeah.
One part of my story that I left out was that I did go to the patient advocacy, and the surgeon had told me they couldn't give me a referral outside of the VA because the VA doesn't do that type of surgery. And I went to patient advocacy and they escalated up to the head surgeon. The head surgeon, the director of surgery from the VA called me and gave me a referral outside of the VA. And through George Washington University, Washington Hospital Center. So that was the first step. But the second step is to make sure no woman has to go through this.
I'm like really loving this conversation, and it's not going where I thought it was going to go, but this idea that we are beautiful and have power even if we are afraid, and even if we're in a difficult situation, and even if we don't know what to do. And I think that this notion about not being aware of where you're powerful and what you can do, I think that's very characteristic of the human condition, that you can't see how powerful you are when you're in that situation. And the situations that you're describing, whether you're, the patient or the client or the advocate, part of that process is doing some type of body scan. How is my body feeling? What is my power? What's at risk? All of those sort of things. You do it in an instant. But what I was sharing about listening to veterans over those 20 years is that they had this ability, because they had been in so many extreme situations, to almost do something automatically, but that when they had a moment to analyze how they did stuff, writing about that and talking about that is such a gift, to the rest of us. And when you're in a situation, like if you were in the street and somebody was getting ready to get run over by a car, or like I have a bunch of my relatives that are firefighters, and they talk about, they don't think twice about going into a burning building, because they're not thinking about themselves. They're thinking about that child, or, hearing a voice, or what if I miss somebody? They're not focused on their own risk when it's clear that if you don't take action, what will happen. But when it's not clear about the action or the consequences, I think that's where we struggle. So I'm so grateful for this conversation, and being in both an advocate and a victim in some situations, almost simultaneously. I think a lot of times, a lot of the veterans didn't realize the power that they had. And one of the reasons that I felt like I often, I'm looking at it differently now, but one of the reasons that I got attacked as an advocate is that people would say to me, why did you tell that person they could get that referral? How dare you show them the regulation? It's like somehow there's a risk in informing people or suggesting to someone, maybe you do have more power than you think you do. Maybe there's another way to look at this. I think that some systems, some empires are very much built around the notion, don't tell the person anything that would make them know how powerful that they are, that God does love them. Well, can they interpret the Bible? Things that would educate the person, like you were saying about having a review of, anything that would allow you to think differently. There's some environments, there's some institutions that are built squarely on the notion that you don't do that. And then the other thing Audre Lorde talks about in Sister Outsider and other places is this notion that speaking up or speaking out is disrespectful. Like if you talk back to your mom, talk back to your priest, talk back to your whoever, it's considered disrespectful to the other person, but we don't consider the disrespect to that person and that there's an imbalance in power. And I also really love that about her work, where she talks about the complexity of disrespect. In the military, they call it insubordination. You are not allowed to say no or to challenge your upline or your commanding officer in certain situations, and that you're taught that disrespect or disobedience, no matter the situation, is wrong. And how do we jump over that hurdle when that has been so ingrained in us?
So we've talked a little bit, it's come up about the relationship of silence and fear. And Audre Lorde writes about that a lot in this particular essay as well. And sometimes the language of faith is overcoming fear and this whole idea of being victors over fear. My sense of honoring the Lord in relation to fear is naming it, noting it, and in a sense, being aware that it's almost like a partner in the process. And so she speaks to that as she's preparing for this address she's going to make. And she writes, and of course I am afraid, because the transformation of silence into language and action is an act of self-revelation, and that always seems fraught with danger. But my daughter, when I told her of our topic and my difficulty with it, said, tell them about how you're never really a whole person if you remain silent. Because there's always that one little piece inside you that wants to be spoken out. And if you keep ignoring it, it gets madder and madder and hotter and hotter. And if you don't speak it out, one day it will just up and punch you in the mouth from the inside. And so for one thing, I thought of just how Audre Lorde was impacting her own daughter to have that insight. This kind of speaks to the idea of the body aspect. How do we know when to speak and when to be silent? Well, as some of us already said today, it's noticing what's happening in your body. And so I thought this quote by her daughter in juxtaposition with this idea of the relationship to fear was helpful and important. How do we know? What are your thoughts on this idea of fear? Because I think sometimes there's a lot of talk about faith and overcoming, and I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. These are some of the important aspirations, and yet part of the downside of all of that is that if people still feel fear or notice fear, some immediately begin to think, well, there's something wrong with my faith. I'm still afraid. There must be a faith deficit of some kind. And what I'm seeing here is faith is noticing the fear, being present to it, and not seeing it as something you necessarily overcome. It's always there.
That's a tough one. Because all my life I've heard fear and faith do not coexist.
Mhm. Yes.
And I think maybe that's too black and white. I think I can be fearful, but not let the fear overtake me. So the fear is so great, and dealing with fear, like mindfully dealing with fear, the fear may go away at some point. Fear and faith do not coexist. So if I have fear, that means I don't have faith. That means I'm not doing the right thing in front of the God of my understanding, and I'm not a good person, and it can just snowball.
Sure. Becomes a sort of defeatism. So I absolutely believe that faith and fear are very closely connected.
I think one of the things, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, thank you. I don't know if it was in this conversation or we went to a historical World War II museum. And we saw a film of folks of a sole survivor of an attack in World War II in Midway. And this person talked about, well, I'm the sole survivor from my squadron. The speech that they got, kind of the rousing, okay, we're about to do this and come together, and was, you may be afraid, trust in whoever you pray to, or you trust in, and move forward anyway. And some of the interviews of other survivors of that period, you know, the interviewer was asking them, well, were you afraid to, you know, go on the beach, or were you afraid to, you know, move forward in these movements? And almost 100% of the answers were, well, yeah, I was afraid. I was really afraid. And we knew we had a calling. We knew we had to do this. Now, however you feel about the warfare, and however you feel about the countries and all of that, the feelings of the individuals for moving into there and through their fear because of a higher calling, I thought was admirable. I thought was notable, and that I, as a person of faith, yes, I have fears, as we have spoken here today, and as Audrey Lord speaks to, and moving, if it's through, if it's around, if it's over, if it's above, those fears to accomplish what I feel to be a higher goal, a higher calling, is imperative. And realizing, yes, there's likely very often consequences to doing that. And are those consequences, you know, giving my life, or are those consequences giving my reputation, or are those consequences helping someone else through their difficult times, whatever those consequences might be? There is a biblical reference to counting the cost of what they're going to do, and then they're going to do them anyway, or not. So we have the choice. Yeah. So I think our Lord speaks to that. Yeah. Yeah.
I have something, and Becky, you were gonna say something as well. Thank you.
I'm good. I'm in listening mode. This is just so, you know, it's so beautiful. Please, if you have something to say, I'm savoring the listening. I can add in later if I need to.
Okay, I'll go jump in. I think fear is really interesting, because the thing for me that I don't want to forget about fear, you know, I think about systems. I always come back to systems, and I'm always asking myself, how much fear? How often fear? How much is the world set up to instigate fear in me? How much do I have to work not to be afraid? How much do I have to prepare for fear? How much do I have to prepare to deal with fear? How much community do I have to form to protect myself, adjust to support others around fear? And so fear is also very informative about how the world needs to change. And so I think I don't ever want to, I mean, yes, I want to do and not have fear prevent me from doing, but I also want to use fear as an indicator that there's too darn much of it. And there's a personal consequence around what it means to be loaded up by it all the time, you know, and certainly intergenerationally. I know it exists in my own family. You know, I know it very well because of what I know about my personal family and other people's family, about how that works intergenerationally, the built-in terror that exists around the injustice, for instance, systemically, that lands down, that lands in the body as fear. That I want to honor myself as understanding what it is, that it isn't just an individual thing that I'm responding to, that it's intergenerational and it's old and it's built up and it continues, and it shouldn't. And I don't want to ever get oblivious to that or say it's okay or say, I just gotta adjust. The world needs to be different. And so there is a thing about fear around that.
Yeah.
And you talk about what will punch you in the mouth, that I don't want to have punching me in the mouth. I want to understand that that's systemic and old and work in community to have that go away.
Yes.
So that to me is really, I don't ever want to forget that. And that's part of personal responsibility is where the personal and the systemic get together is remembering that and working to try to stop that because it harms all of us. So that to me is the fear piece is it's an indicator. And I don't want it.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't have to have it. I don't think God intends that for any of us. I don't believe that. I mean, that to me is the message of Jesus. And that's what brought me back to leadership in the institution from the inside. Is I believe that's the message of Jesus, that's not the way the world's supposed to be.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's a big yes, and
Yeah,
and naming it, noticing it, and we always have springboards and other topics. Another essay we'll look at is the master's tools cannot dismantle the master's.
Yeah.
Which talks to the power dynamics and the relationship power. And it's another whole conversation how religion is so complicit at times, oftentimes, it still is structurally with the dynamics of fear and keeping fear and the canonization process. This is another whole session about how fear really controlled much of the canonization process. So what voices should be in the Bible today that are not because of fear and because of patriarchy, misogyny. There's more and more writings that are continuing to be unearthed in archaeology and such that speak to the divine feminine, Sophia wisdom, that are yet to be fully reclaimed, and those are going to help with that idea of addressing these power dynamics and fear dynamics that you speak to. Yeah,
it's, Dr. Crawley, we talked about the family.
Yeah.
It just kind of took me back of that diagnosed with social anxiety. Meaning going anywhere where there's more than 3 people, it's petrifying. I mean, like to the point of, it's like I have to do a lot of praying before I walk out of my door. But overcoming that fear, and it's like I can do it one time and feel great that I did it, but then it's right back again. Okay, so I have to do something else, I have to go outside that door. So, but overcoming that fear, even if it's episode by episode, I overcome my fear to attain a marriage. When I sat at a table with people I didn't know and met a woman who was going to help me with my VA stuff. If I hadn't stepped out the door, if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have met her. And, it's like facing fear can be so empowering as well, even if it's episode by episode, but just getting out that door makes a big difference.
excellent.
So thanks for the invitation.
Thanks.
all right. Well, as always, this time has gone quickly. Be thinking, I'd like us who are comfortable to kind of share the next step for you or the next prompting. And I do want to go ahead and close this time with the last words of her address, which speaks so much into what we've been talking about. We can learn to work and speak when we are afraid, in the same way we have learned to work and speak when we are tired. For we have been socialized to respect fear more than our own needs for language and definition. And while we wait in silence for that final luxury of fearlessness, The weight of that silence will choke us. The fact that we are here and that I speak these words is an attempt to break that silence and bridge some of those differences between us. For it is not difference which immobilize us, but silence. And there are so many silences to be broken. So here we are now. This was written in, she spoke this in the late I think 1979, if I'm correct. And here we are, 2024. And there are so many silences to be broken. So I wanted to kind of put that out there. And kind of next steps or thoughts or something you'll continue to think about from here. My next step is to, I've not read the cancer journals yet. There's a number of a lot of work for me to do. Just to take in more of what she's writing. I've watched a few interviews with her. And I would encourage that as a step for those who have not had that opportunity, because there is something in her that comes through in her spoken voice and in her presence that really deepens her writing. So I want to watch more of these the interviews that are there. So that's my next part of my next step, is to go further and deeper with Father and Lord. Other things you'll keep thinking about, praying about, doing, next steps. So we kind of wrap up. Anyone that's comfortable.
Well, I kind of have already started. I'm looking for volunteer work. And one of the places I'm looking is Maryland Trans, because I want to understand the trans community better than I do. And I think working on a volunteer basis, I want to do like political stuff and administrative stuff with them. I signed up for the SPCA, and I have one more to go. And I think right now I'm probably going to volunteer to get the vote out, and also in Kamala's campaigns. So that's breaking the silence
Yeah, a lot of actions.
and social input.
Yeah, all right. Excellent.
That's raising that head on. Yeah, right.
Other,
I think for me, it's thinking about, I like to think about tools. And when I was working on proposals, there was a four-pronged approach: people, tools, process, and technology. And so when you're making a proposal, make sure you cover all of those things. And so when I approach challenges, I look at those people, processes, tools, and technology. And I like to think about tools so that when I face the fear, or when the fear, like you're saying, when the fear bubbles up and rises up, and I have a desire to kind of slice through the fear, or beat up the fear, or give fear a kick in the places that I have the tools to do so in the particular circumstances where I would find myself fearful. So if it's work, if it's an organization, if it's whatever the case might be, the different tools to be able to face that and to move forward through that.
Yeah.
For me. So that's what I like to think about.
yeah.
I'm never surprised.
That's a shock.
I think I'm shocked.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. I'm thinking if the master's tools cannot dismantle the master's what tools will. So that's another, we've got growing topics for this engagement time. Other things that you're thinking about or doing. Anyone else?
I just say that I'm inspired by people sharing very personally, which is also a form of breaking silence about yourself and your experiences. So I try to take inspiration by that. That's movement forward.
So my fear is that Green's not gonna be here next week.
Okay.
Well,
I won't be silent. You have my number, you can call.
Jump it in the pool, yes.
I'll be there.
After the PAD, People of African Descent convention conference, there was an invitation like, you know, what are you willing to go forth and do? And I wrote in my journal, and I think I shared with some people that I wanted to be a better listener and create more spaces where people could have to be listened to and to have real experiences with communion and building community. And I feel like, you know, that happened, you know, a week or two ago, and now here I am 2 weeks later. I really want to affirm that, and a shout out and to thank people that you know, if you're listening to this 10 years from now or 20 years from now, a lot of things I learned how to do at MCC. You know, Reverend Kathy probably doesn't remember this, but we had Creating a Life That Matters tools, and you know, I know she likes tools and experiences, but Creating a Life That Mattered for me was, I would have to say, the first place where I got introduced to this concept that you can feel two things at once. You can have faith and fear, be scared and do it anyway, and that you don't have to conform. I had never heard that before anywhere, and I certainly never heard that in church. So that is something that has stuck with me and resonated with me, and I want to co-create with that. And then the other thing that I guess I feel committed to do, and I need to say out loud, is that we really don't have a lot of places where people feel listened to. Like right now, everybody has to have a label. I have to tell you my whole sexual history before you'll talk to me. You know, you don't have any idea what somebody's been through. And that's something that I learned both at MCC and I have to say from my veterans that, you know, people say, you don't know anything about me. You don't know what I've been through. Well, shut up, because you don't know what I've been through. And a lot of people that are silent taught me that just because someone's silent or they don't have a label on them doesn't mean you know anything about them. And so the invitation to say, I'm really willing to listen, and I really want to be a good neighbor, and I really want to get to know you better. It's just so sweet, and a sweet invitation, a Christian invitation, a loving invitation to kindness. And yesterday on our block, we've been doing a lot of things to be more hospitable, and the church on our corner is a place called Macedonia Baptist Church, and they had a big fish fry and all of this, and the pastor there, he has a t-shirt. They all have the same t-shirt on, but the back of his t-shirt, it says Pastor Minor, and he was just so friendly, and he came up to me and shook my hand, and you know, he didn't hustle me to join the church, and he just said, I hope you've enjoyed the day and the fish, and you have such a nice smile, and do you want to come to my church? And I said, you know what, I might stop by and come to your church. And he said, all I want is for people to feel love and a sense of community, and for us to be good neighbors. And he teared up, and I just like, you know, we teared up together, and it was just such a beautiful moment when, you know, everybody's talking about divisiveness, but here we were experiencing connection and community and all of that. So thank you. I know we got to go.
Thank you. All right. Thank you. Any final words? That's all right. So just receive breath and spirit. We pray for that wisdom to know when to speak, when to be silent, and to act when to wait. We pray that we would know what tools to use that will dismantle racism, sexism, oppression, fear in its many forms. Go now in love and grace and peace, in the many names of love. Amen.
Bye.
Bye, Jackie.
Bye, everyone.